Hebrews chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received the just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him?
Last Sunday morning, I mentioned to you that Donna Butler was in the hospital. I'm happy to mention to you today that she's with us and feeling better. Pray that that continues. Do you get in a hurry? I find that many people are in a hurry for a lot of different reasons. But I also find that, in general speaking, they're generally not in a hurry for the things that matter. We have a tendency to put things off, do we not? Reminds me of the story of three turtles who decided to enter a cafe for a cup of coffee. Just as they walked through the door, it started to rain, and so the largest turtle said to the smallest turtle, "Would you go home and get our umbrellas?" And the small turtle said, "I will if you promise not to drink my coffee till I get back." They agreed. 2 weeks later, the big turtle said to the middle turtle, "I guess we'd just as well drink his coffee. I think he's coming back." And the little turtle outside the door said, "If you do, I'll never leave." And honestly, I know folks that are about that slow when it comes to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I was thinking during that last song, which I remember singing when I was a young fella, Tim, a good old hymn. I grew up in a congregation without a full-time preacher. We had baptisms in the spring and in the fall when we had our gospel meetings. And I don't ever remember anyone being baptized outside of those gospel meetings. And often people knew the truth long before they obeyed, but they kept putting it off. That was true in my own life. Having heard the gospel all of my life, I knew early on what I needed to do. And honestly, I knew what would happen if I failed to do it and died. But I kept putting it off and putting it off. I've thought about that many times over the years, and I have yet to figure out why that was the case. I wasn't doing anything before my baptism that I could think of that I had to stop afterwards. Having grown up in a Christian home, we were not allowed to use vulgar language. That just wasn't an option. You might do it once, you'd never do it again, not where you could be heard anyway. So I never developed that habit. I didn't smoke. I've never taken a drink or a puff of a cigarette in my entire life, and don't ever intend to. There were not that many things that needed to change. I wasn't perfect. None of us are, and I knew that, but I don't know why. I didn't have wild oats to sow. I can't plead ignorance because I understood. I just put it off, as probably some folks are doing right now. We tend to do that with a lot of things, don't we? Are you planning a diet? You know, Brad spoke to us Wednesday night about resolutions, and he was a little surprised that not many of us make them, and those who do generally break them shortly after they're made. As I told you, I wouldn't mind losing some weight, but I mind doing the things that would make that possible. I enjoy eating, and I've never liked exercise. I don't mind working. I don't mind walking if it's going from point A to point B because I need to be at point B, but just to walk has never been something that appeals to me. I don't even like mowing the grass, but I like the grass to be mowed, and so I do it. And I don't ride, I push because I need the exercise. At least there's some purpose there, but dieting, it's just something I keep putting off. That's why I keep putting off an exercise program. You all who were here when Chip Pugh was here, remember that Chip had a degree basically in physical science, how to be fit, and he offered at least a half a dozen times to work up a program just for me, and I declined every time because it would have been a waste of his time. I wasn't going to do it. Maybe someday, Bob, I'll decide it's time to exercise, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. What about getting involved in the Lord's work, or maybe calling someone, or making a visit, or just writing a note of encouragement? Now, those are the kinds of things I would suggest to you that you shouldn't put off. It's okay if you don't exercise a great deal. It's all right if you're not dieting. That's not going to stand between you and eternity. But now we're dealing with the matters that really matter. These are the things that people generally put off all the time. Maybe you're going to ask someone to marry you. What are you waiting for? Why do you keep putting it off? And then, are you going to obey the gospel? One of the neat things today is that you can obey the gospel 24/7. All it takes is a phone call, an email. Just stop me in the hall, and we can do it on your schedule. We can do it when the people you want to be here are here. But please stop putting it off, because your soul is just too important. The reality is that we procrastinate all the time. You need to take your car to the mechanic. Need an oil change, the tires rotated. Used to be you changed the spark plugs. I haven't changed spark plugs, and I couldn't tell you how long. I'm kind of happy about that, by the way. They're pretty expensive, and I don't like to get dirty. But if you need to put them off, or if you need to do it, do it. Where'd that come from, John? Disappeared. Did you see that? Little window jumped up there. Did you see that? Huh. Well, I'll ignore it next time, but this window just came up on my slide. I thought, what in the world is that? Need to go to the doctor or the dentist? Need to write a will? You know, Tim's here. He can help you. It's not that costly. People don't write wills because they think if they do, they're going to die. Hey, you're going to die anyway. Do your family a favor. Get in writing before it's too late. And obey the gospel. These are some areas where the consequences of delay can be costly, deadly, even eternal. Again, we delay a lot of things. We procrastinate over a lot of issues that are okay to set aside, to put on the back burner. But there are some matters that matter so much that we need to act. And the Bible calls for decisive action. Note this passage in Matthew 4. It's the story of 4 fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. They're in business together. They're mending their nets when Jesus comes by. He calls them to follow him. He says, you're fishermen, but I will make you fishers of men. And what does the record say? They immediately left their nets and followed him. Then I think about my own story, and I wonder, why did I hold back? What reason could I offer for delay? And the reality is I couldn't offer a reason, just an excuse. Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Because now, ladies and gentlemen, is all we have. Yesterday, a faraway memory. Tomorrow, a vague promise. But we have today. And the most urgent matters need to be taken care of now. What did our text urge? That we give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard or learned, lest we let them slip. If we don't act now, we may not act at all. Things that are not acted upon are often forgotten or lost. And we can't afford to be lost eternally. You know, Israel suffered because of procrastination. The prophet Haggai wrote to his people about a pressing issue: the construction of the second temple. The first, Solomon's temple, had been destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. The Israelites, the residents of Jerusalem and Judah, had been in captivity for 70 years when King Cyrus of Persia decrees that they can return, rebuild their temple and their city. And so under the leadership of Ezra, Zerubbabel, and Joshua, they returned. And immediately they got to work laying the foundations for a new temple. But when the foundations were completed, the work ended. And it is 16 years later when Haggai and his contemporary Zechariah go to work and say to the people of God, as long as you fail to do the work God sent you back to do, you're not going to get anywhere. You put money in bags with holes. You plant gardens, but you never reap a large increase. You plan, you put forth effort, but not for the matters that matter most. In essence, he said, you need to get your act together and get the job done. What is it that you keep putting off that you can't afford to put off? The message of Scripture is that you need to act now. Felix is perhaps the best-known procrastinator in the New Testament. He had the opportunity, while Paul was a prisoner, to hear Paul deliver a gospel sermon. He did so in the company of his wife Drusilla. Paul preached a 3-point message. I don't know how long that was, but I know there were 3 substantial points he made. Man needs to be righteous. Man needs to be merciful. Man needs to prepare for judgment. And Felix, at least, I can't say for Drusilla, but Felix at least understood what he'd heard. He believed in the validity of the message that had been proclaimed and had intent at some point to act upon it. He said, sometime when I have a more convenient season, I will call for you. And that convenient time never came. How many folks do you suppose will be lost eternally, not because they didn't know or didn't believe, but because they delayed? They were waiting for the perfect time, and the perfect time is always now. Don't delay. The matters that matter need to be acted upon immediately. And this is especially true, young people, listen to me. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when you shall say, I have no pleasure in them. The older we get, the harder it becomes to make the choices that must be made and ought to be made early in life, which will impact that life in a positive way for the remainder of your existence. Can you wait until you're in your 90s, obey the gospel, and be saved? Absolutely. In fact, in Matthew 20, Jesus has a parable designed to convey that very message. But why would anybody want to do that? If they know and understand the truth, recognize their sinfulness and the power of the blood of Christ to wash away that sin, why would anyone want to delay? And the argument of Solomon is, if you're wise, you won't. And by the way, this great chapter closes with a familiar text. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man, for God will bring every work into judgment, whether good or evil. We had better be ready. So why do people procrastinate, delay? in particular their obedience to the gospel, but many other things as well. I'm going to offer some quick answers for you this morning that I believe are very biblically based. People delay because they just lack proper priorities. One of my favorite stories, and I know I've shared it many times and will continue to use it because it just really resonates with me, even if it doesn't with you, is about a college professor on the first day of class, wanting to teach his students a very powerful lesson, filled a mason jar with river rock. And he asked the class, "Is the jar full?" And they immediately said, "Yes." Then he proceeded to pour in sand until the sand was at the top of the jar. And he said, "Is it full?" And again they said, "Yes." And he said, "No." And he proceeded to pour water in until it overflowed onto the table. And he asked a third time, "Is it full?" And of course, at this point, it could be said, "It is full." And not a single person voiced a response. I guess they learned. So acknowledging that it is now full, he asked the class, "What lesson do you take from this illustration?" And a young lady raised her hand and said, "The lesson is this: no matter how crowded your life may get, there's always room for something more." And he said, "No, I'm sorry, that's not it." He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, here's the lesson you should learn. If you want the rocks in, they have to go first. You can't put the sand in the water first. The rocks have to go first. You have to prioritize." And that's true with all of life. What do we generally do? Just the opposite. We take care of the easy and the trivial and put the most important on the back burner. Or we'll think about material things and what's necessary for the body, and just we'll take care of our soul, our spiritual nature. We'll address that at some point, but this is not the time. Now is not the place. But Jesus would argue that nothing matters more than our soul. What shall we give in exchange for our soul, he asked. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Matthew 16:26. You see, if you haven't taken care of your spiritual need, you haven't gotten the right priorities in life yet. Sometimes folks just fail to understand the urgency of acting. What are your plans for the rest of the day? For this week? For this year? We tend to make plans. And by the way, the Bible does not say that we shouldn't. But the Bible teaches us that we should make all of our plans in conjunction with the Lord's will. In James chapter 4, James described those who say, "I'm going into such and such a city and buy and sell for a year and get gain." There's nothing wrong with saying that as long as you include "if the Lord wills." We don't have any control over the future. Thus, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16, Paul admonishes the saints at Ephesus, "Redeem the time." What do you mean, Paul? Use it wisely. Take advantage of the here and now. It's all you have. We live as though there will always be a tomorrow, but there's no guarantee. I look back over the last 32 years and I look into this crowd today, and I can just close my eyes and picture the people who used to sit in certain spots. You know, we all have our pew. If the Smiths ever came in on Sunday morning and sat center church, I would probably pass out because their section is there. Well, we all have those kinds of practices. I can look back and think of people who I know where they sat. They're not here anymore. They've gone the way of all earth. Thankfully, they were ready. I can't help but ask, are we? Are we redeeming the time? Or are we putting off the matters that matter most? Sometimes it's just doubt and uncertainty. Well, I'm not sure if I can live the Christian life. I'm not sure that I could be the person God wants me to be. Folks, none of us are ever perfect. The Bible says that all sin comes short of the glory of God. That includes every one of us and everyone we know, everyone who will eventually be born, everyone who has ever been born, with the exception of Jesus. God does not call us to be sinless creatures. He calls us to be saints, lives simply set apart to do His bidding, to prioritize our time as He would have us do, and to realize that we will never have all the answers. We will never fully comply with every demand of God, but God's only wanting us to do our best. And our best differs from person to person. Some women are better cooks than others. Some people are better mathematicians than others. Some people can work with their hands better than others, but we all have our own unique characteristics and qualities, and all God is saying to us is use them. He will not judge us by anybody else's standard. He will judge us based on our own unique personality, our own unique capabilities, and He does not ask of any more than he can or she can give. Get rid of the doubt and uncertainty and act. Sometimes we put off things because they're unpleasant, even obedience to the gospel. You know, part of that process includes an immersion, a burial in water, always followed by a resurrection to new life, by the way. Because somebody will tell me, I'm afraid of water, preacher. Nobody is ever put under and left there. Without exception, everybody comes back up out. But it's a humiliating experience, I grant you that. I didn't always used to be as outgoing as I am today. I'll never be as outgoing as some people. But as a youngster, through most of my teen years, I would never say anything in public to anyone. I'd never have thought about standing in an auditorium like this and speaking for 30 minutes. That just wasn't my nature. I sat in the Bill Wharton corner of our building where nobody could even see the back of my neck. There wasn't even a pew to walk behind. It was right up against the wall. I couldn't stand the thoughts of people looking at the back of my head. Now you're all looking at the back of somebody's head right now and wondering why. Focus on me. I was just shy. And it was hard to step out and respond to the gospel and to be baptized in front of so many people. But it would be far worse to face eternity having not done that. And no, I don't believe that baptism is the end of it all. It is, in fact, the beginning. That's why it's called a new birth. But you've got to come to grips with the fact that sometimes difficult things and sometimes unpleasant things are the things that need to be done. Stop putting them off, do them. Even if it's hard. Again, I started out by saying there's the tendency on our part to do the easy stuff and lay the hard part aside. I start my week, I want the hard part done first. I don't want to come down to Saturday evening and not know what am I going to say in Bible class Sunday morning. What am I going to say as I speak at the morning and evening assemblies? I know preachers who operate that way. I'm not one of them. I can't operate that way. Be a nervous wreck. You get done what needs to be done as soon as you can. You don't put it off. And yet that's not human nature. And the reality is sometimes we procrastinate just because of sheer laziness. There's a time to rest. But laziness should not be in the vocabulary of a child of God. In fact, the Apostle Paul wrote one of his epistles, in my judgment, addressing that very issue, where saints have decided the Lord may return at any day, so we're just going to sit back and wait. We'll quit our jobs, we'll stop planting our crops, and we're just going to sit back and do nothing and wait for him to arrive. Now, I believe there are times when it's appropriate to just do nothing, to chill out, if you please. But that is not the way to live a life. We've got to be willing to work. And then there's the belief that there will always be a tomorrow that causes people to delay. You're going to start a project tomorrow. You're going to make a visit tomorrow. Maybe you're going to obey the gospel tomorrow. But the whole point is, let us give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Obviously, folks, I'm not urging us to act rashly when dealing with matters of great consequence. I don't want somebody obeying the gospel just because they're told this is what you need to do. I want them to think it through, to come to a knowledge of who Jesus was, what he did, what he demands, and the great debt that all of us owe, and then act accordingly. I want us to prioritize. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 3:13 wrote, "This one thing I do." If you had to summarize your life with this one thing I do, what would it be? I go to work every morning on time, and I work hard to provide for my family. That's a wonderful thing to do. But I submit to you, it's not the one most important and urgent thing. Oh, I'm a good neighbor, and I live a good life, and I set a good example. And again, that's wonderful. Keep doing it. But if you're not a child of God, you're just like Cornelius, a condemned good man. And you don't want to face judgment that way. Paul said he forgot the things which were behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are ahead, he pressed on toward the prize for the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Wise course through life, folks, is very simple. Address the difficult and the unpleasant first in your daily schedule, and do so from a Christian perspective by getting your life right with the Lord while you have the time, place, and opportunity. Because you may not have that time tomorrow. Today is yours. Use it. What have you been putting off? You know, I'm not screaming it's time to act, but I'd like to. Who do you need to see and to say, honestly, you know I've not treated you fairly. I know I wronged you. I know I haven't been the person to you I should have been. Forgive me. And let's restore our friendship. What person is out there that needs just an encouraging word, a warm embrace, just a kind deed? And you can do it. Don't put it off. And what about your relationship with the Lord? Take action while you still can. I like those words. I have them somewhere on a plaque. I heard them first when Fred Dennis was preaching in a gospel meeting back in the early 70s. The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when the hands may stop at late or early hour. Now is the only time you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no trust in the morrow, for the hands may then be still. There's not a soul in this assembly who does not know what they need to do. The question is, will you do it now?